Good day. January 14 gone. Made it 115 years since the great earthquake of 1907 that flattened Kingston. Almost 2,000 people died as a result of that earthquake. Many were trapped and 27 legs were amputated before the day was over. As a result of the devastation caused by the earthquake of 1907, a building code was established by the Kingston and St. Andrew Corporation Council, now known as the Kingston and St. Andrew Municipal Council, to minimize the destruction of buildings during earthquakes. 65 years ago in 1957, there was in fact another major earthquake that we hardly hear about. Actually, it even damaged the lone Richter scale owned by the Jesuits at the Roman Catholic St. George's College. By the way, after the Richter scale was repaired, the Jesuits donated the Richter scale to the University of the West Indies. But the mayor at the time, Councillor Balfour Barneswell, in a speech stated in 1957, "Now you know why we have a building code. The fact is that the damage might very well have been as severe or more so as in 1907, and it might have had little or nothing to do with the difference in the severity of the earthquake." Since 1952, when Carib Cement Company was established, building blocks with holes for steel became the normal way for building houses. But in nearby Haiti, the norm is not to build buildings with steel at all, and this is why the earthquakes cause so much damage there. This is not to say that only steel buildings are sturdy. Look at the boulders underneath Flat Bridge that has kept that bridge up for centuries. There is no steel in them, but whatever was used for cement is very strong. So are the two oldest buildings at Jamaica College. Those two buildings, built in 1883, have no steel in them either. Yet sometime in about 2005, a decision was made to make a doorway between two small rooms, and it took 3 men 4 days to break through the wall. I am a volunteer at my alma mater, Jamaica College. I volunteer in guidance. And I was on my way out on the day of the week that I go there. And I saw the insides of the wall. So after they had at least bored through the wall and made a doorway before casting. So I can tell you definitely that there's no steel in that building. But back to the 1907 earthquake. The earthquakes were accompanied by fires. The question is, did the earthquakes cause the fire, or was there at least one instance that there was a pre-earthquake fire? This was a very important question in 1907 until 1908, when the merchants won their case against their insurers. The King Street merchants were insured against fire, but they were not insured against earthquakes. The insurance companies refused to meet their claims on the grounds that their damage was caused by the earthquake, not fire, and they were not insured against earthquakes. The case was tried both in Jamaica and in England. At that time, Jamaica was still a colony of Great Britain, and it would be until another 55 years, finally gaining political independence in 1962. King Street was the hub of the commercial activity in Jamaica, a fact that is difficult to imagine today, as King Street is now almost desolate in comparison to then. If the merchants had not won their case in proving that the King Street fire was started before the earthquake, the Jamaican economy would have been in shambles. Those merchants employed a set of workers who formed the urban middle class, and they in turn all had their domestic helpers and gardeners. Those at the lower end of the economic scale were in such dire poverty that they preferred to work for a few coins rather than not work at all. And that was the lot of the domestic helpers at that time, which would have been made worse if they lost their jobs. The trial took 15 days, which ended on February 1, 1908. The insurers appealed, but their case was dismissed. One of the telling arguments is that the fires did not go in the same direction as the worst hit areas by the earthquake. For example, there was no fire up on Duke Street on where the old Holy Trinity Cathedral used to be. There was no fire there. If everyone was suddenly unemployed in Kingston, then the 1938 riots might have started perhaps 25 years earlier. But at that time, it might not have resulted in universal suffrage, self-government, and political independence. Great Britain at that time might simply have declared martial law. At the end of the day, the case rested on the witness of John George Little, the seaboat captain of Port Kingston. He it was who was docked in Kingston. He noticed the fire coming from behind the Anglican parish church before his boat rocked with the earthquake. John Little was fired from his job on trumped-up charges because his boss had shares in the insurance business. Paul Levy, an attorney born and raised in Jamaica, who now resides in Canada and is now 85 years old, wrote this book entitled The Great Case, for which I am extremely grateful. Other local historians have not seen this matter important enough to highlight it in historical documents. The case took place in Mandeville, which is why there is a photograph of the Mandeville courthouse on the cover of the book. Contrary to popular belief, the fire did not start in Dr. Aiton's surgery, as the office helper said she had put out the Bunsen burner before the earthquake. At least that is the testimony that was given by his office helper in court. In those days, doctors made their own medicines, and one would go to a drugstore and have to come back when the medicine was made. On the same day, January 14, 1907, there was an important agricultural meeting of representatives of all the British colonies in the Caribbean in attendance. The meeting was at Michael Teachers College. Some of the participants had gone down to Myrtle Bank Hotel for a late lunch at 3:35 when the earthquake occurred. The parish church clock had stopped at exactly 3:35 p.m. when the earthquake occurred. Many of them were called as witnesses to determine whether the fire started first or the earthquake. In those days, there was a clear view of the harbor from Michael Teachers College, as there were no tall buildings such as the Ministry of Education and so on, but which came perhaps more than 50 years later. The headmaster of Jamaica College, Canon William Sims, later Archdeacon William Sims, an Anglican minister, was called upon to testify. He noticed the fire after the shocks. This was testimony to the honesty of Mr. Sims. He was giving his honest opinion, and he saw the fire afterwards. Yet he must have known that if the merchants were ruined, it would have affected Jamaica College, where the merchants' sons attended, and if their parents were ruined, how could they pay the school fees? Jamaica College was then the tropical science outpost of the University of London, but it was being sponsored by Jamaican taxpayers, and many did not like it and thought that Jamaica was not ready for a university. So that would have been another setback. The greatest defense for the continuation of the university came from Canon Sims. If the merchants were wiped out by not being able to get their insurance, the discontinuance of JC as a university college would be bound to happen, as indeed it did happen by the year 1909. I honestly believe that the earthquake was a factor in that decision for financial reasons. So the real witness, and this is what made the case, was John Little, who was the captain of a seaboat known as the Port of Kingston. He was in the harbor and saw the fire before the earthquake. He was fired from his job because the owners of the boat were also in the insurance business. But he was honored by the people of Kingston. And I think that this is very, very important information for everybody to know, that this was part and parcel of the happenings of the earthquake and the aftermath of 1907.